The Whitmore estate had always been a place of perfection. Polished marble floors gleamed under chandeliers. Halls stretched further than any visitor could remember, and every corner whispered wealth and privilege. Yet today, no grandeur could mask the fear that had settled over the mansion. Jonathan Whitmore, the billionaire patriarch, moved restlessly from room to room, his tie slightly askew, his hands clenched in a way only worry could justify. His son, Henry, lay in a bed designed more like a small hospital than a nursery, pale and fragile, each breath shallow and uneven. Doctors had been summoned from across the country. Machines hummed and beeped, and charts covered every surface. But all the knowledge, all the money in the world, could not promise the one thing Jonathan wanted more than anything: his boy's survival. The air was heavy with despair, and even the sunlight streaming through the tall windows seemed hesitant, as if it too feared to intrude upon this fragile scene. Maria, the maid, watched quietly from the doorway. She had been with the Whitmores for years, moving silently, unnoticed by most, yet always present when it mattered. She had seen joy in this house and heartbreak, though never like this. Her hands were steady, her voice calm, and her heart, though often ignored by those who measured life in wealth and power, beat with a courage Jonathan could not yet comprehend. "Hello, Henry," Maria whispered, kneeling beside the boy. Her voice was soft, gentle, but full of a warmth that seemed to push back the shadow that had claimed the room. She took his tiny hand in hers, brushing his damp hair back from his forehead. "It's okay. I'm here. You're safe." Jonathan paused just outside the bed's rail. He wanted to step forward, to say something, anything, but words failed him. All he could do was watch. And as Maria spoke, telling Henry little stories, recalling moments of laughter they had shared, he felt a shift. It was subtle at first, a slight slackening of tension in the monitors, a flutter of color returning to his son's cheeks, but undeniable. Maria did not call herself a hero. She did not speak of miracles. She simply refused to leave Henry alone, refused to let despair win, refused to allow the inevitable to claim what she could still fight for. And in that refusal, she did what no amount of money, power, or medical expertise had done. She brought a flicker of hope to a room that had forgotten how to hope. Jonathan realized, in that moment, that the impossible might not lie in science or wealth. The impossible might lie in a quiet hand, a gentle voice, and a heart willing to stand where no one else would. The night had fallen over the Whitmore estate, and with it came a stillness far heavier than any day could bear. The chandeliers glimmered like distant stars, but their light seemed cold, unable to reach the corners where fear had taken root. Jonathan sat in the study, glass in hand, though he did not drink. His eyes, sharp and calculating in business matters, now darted with helplessness. Every monitor's beep from the nursery was a hammer striking his chest. Time was slipping faster than he could chase. In the nursery, Maria remained by Henry's side. She had refused to leave, ignoring the gentle protests of the nurses and even the frustrated sighs of Jonathan himself. She had tried every method known to her, adjusting medications, changing his position, calming his small, trembling body. But nothing seemed enough. Yet she spoke as if her words alone could stitch life back together. Each story, each whispered promise, an invisible thread holding Henry to the world. "Henry," she murmured, brushing a tiny hand against his cheek, "we're going to get through this. I promise you, we're not leaving each other tonight." The boy's eyes flickered open briefly, weak but present, and Maria smiled softly. That small response was like a spark in a long dark room. Jonathan, standing just outside the doorway, felt a pang of awe, mixed with guilt. He had assumed that with enough money, enough influence, he could control life itself. And now, watching Maria, he understood that control was never his to wield. Sometimes, survival depended on heart, courage, and a willingness to do what others would not. The clock ticked closer to midnight, each second amplifying the urgency. Nurses whispered in the corner, offering technical advice, their faces tight with worry. Jonathan's hands clenched into fists, his knuckles white. He had dealt with crises before, financial collapses, corporate takeovers, scandals that could ruin empires, but nothing had ever felt like this. Nothing had ever felt this personal, this raw. Maria noticed his tension but did not falter. She adjusted Henry's blanket, held his hand, and hummed a soft tune, a melody she had sung countless times but never with stakes this high. The night pressed on, and with it came moments of despair that threatened to crush hope entirely. Henry's breathing grew irregular, his small chest rising and falling in fragile waves. Yet Maria stayed, unwavering. She was the calm at the eye of the storm, a presence so simple yet so powerful that even Jonathan felt his own panic ebb slightly in her stead. In that quiet, tense room, surrounded by the tools of wealth and medicine, it became painfully clear. The real fight was not in machines, charts, or prescriptions. The real fight was here, in the courage of someone who refused to give in, who refused to leave a child to fate alone. And as the night stretched on, shadows lengthening across the walls, Maria made a choice. A choice that no one in the house had imagined, an action born of desperation, hope, and a heart that refused to yield. She was about to do something that would change the course of this night, and perhaps the course of Henry's life. The room seemed to shrink as the night deepened, the soft hum of machines a constant reminder that every moment was borrowed. Henry's small body trembled, and Jonathan's jaw tightened with helpless frustration. He had summoned the best doctors, spent millions on treatment, and yet here he was, powerless, watching his son teeter on the edge. Panic clawed at him, but even in his fear, he noticed something he hadn't seen before. Maria, calm, steady, and utterly resolute. For years, she had been the invisible presence in the Whitmore mansion, unnoticed by most, disregarded in the hierarchy of wealth and status. But now, in the face of Henry's fragility, her quiet strength radiated with a force that dwarfed the grandeur around them. Jonathan watched as she knelt beside his son, studying him closely, her brow furrowed in concentration. She whispered words only she and Henry could understand, her lips barely moving, her fingers gentle but precise. And then she made a decision. It was the kind of decision that carried risk, a gamble far beyond protocol, far beyond what any employee should dare to attempt. Maria reached for a small vial she had kept close, something not part of the prescribed treatment plan. Her hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of responsibility. This was more than medicine. It was hope in a bottle, a chance at life in a moment where seconds were already slipping away. Jonathan's voice broke as he stepped forward, panic lacing every word. "Maria, what are you doing? You can't." She turned, eyes locking with his, and for the first time, he truly saw her. Not the maid, not the servant, but the person who had been carrying this night on her shoulders. "I have to try," she said softly, almost as if she were speaking to Henry, not to him. "He doesn't have time. Waiting will only take him from us." For a moment, silence fell over the room. The monitors beeped steadily, unrelenting, as if counting down the seconds of Henry's life. Jonathan wanted to protest, to call the doctors back in, to demand reason, but he just knew, that Maria was right. Hesitation now could cost them everything. With steady hands, she administered the treatment, her movements precise, practiced, yet carried with the urgency of desperation. Henry's small body quivered, his breath uneven, but gradually, almost imperceptibly, the color returned to his cheeks. The monitors shifted, numbers stabilizing, beeps slowing to a rhythm that promised life rather than loss. Jonathan stood frozen, heart pounding, awe and relief battling within him. He had thought that money, power, and influence could buy anything, even life itself. But in this moment, he realized that sometimes the impossible came not from wealth, but from courage, from care, from someone who refused to accept defeat. Maria stayed with Henry, whispering encouragement, keeping her hand on his tiny chest, watching, waiting, until the storm began to settle. And as she finally looked up at Jonathan, he could see it clearly. She had done the impossible. She had given his son a chance, a gift beyond measure, and in doing so, had forever altered the quiet hierarchy of their world. The night did not end quietly. Even as Henry's breathing steadied and the monitors finally hummed in a reassuring rhythm, the mansion seemed different, changed. Jonathan Whitmore stood frozen, staring at his son's peaceful face, a tumult of emotions churning within him. Relief, gratitude, all, and, unexpectedly, humility. All the power and wealth he had amassed, all the influence he wielded in boardrooms and in society, had amounted to nothing in the face of this fragile, human moment. Maria sat quietly beside Henry, her hand still gently holding his. There was no fanfare, no dramatic announcement, only the soft hum of life returning to a boy who, just hours ago, had teetered on the edge of death. Yet the impact of her courage was palpable. The other staff, who had lingered anxiously in the hallway, now looked at her differently, some in awe, some in quiet disbelief. The quietest member of the household had carried the heaviest burden, and she had done it with grace and resolve. Jonathan approached slowly, each step deliberate, as if afraid to disturb the fragile calm. He knelt beside Maria, words catching in his throat. I don't know what to say, he admitted, his voice unsteady. I thought we'd lost him. And yet here he is, because of you. Maria's eyes met his, calm but unwavering. I didn't do it alone, she said softly. He held on. He wanted to fight. I just helped him find the strength. For the first time, Jonathan realized that courage did not always roar. Sometimes it whispered. Sometimes it moved quietly, unnoticed, until the results spoke louder than any words ever could. He had witnessed it firsthand. A life saved not by money, not by influence, but by a human heart willing to act when all else seemed lost. Henry stirred slightly in his sleep, a faint smile touching his lips. Maria brushed a loose strand of hair from his forehead and whispered, "See, you're stronger than anyone believed." Jonathan felt tears prick the corners of his eyes. He had lived a life measured by achievements, by victories, by acquisitions. But this simple, selfless act of bravery was something he could never measure, never repay. In that quiet nursery, the hierarchy of the mansion shifted imperceptibly. Maria, once overlooked, now held a place no title or fortune could grant. The impossible had been achieved, and the echoes of that act would ripple through the house, through Jonathan's heart, and through Henry's life for years to come. Outside the room, the world continued, oblivious to the small miracle that had unfolded. But inside, the mansion had changed. The night, once heavy with fear, now carried a fragile light, a promise that even in the darkest hours, courage could illuminate a path where none seemed to exist. Jonathan sat back in a chair, finally exhaling, and for the first time in hours, he allowed himself to simply watch, to witness life, real, fragile, miraculous, return to his son's chest. And he knew, deep down, that the events of this night would never leave him. They had changed him, reshaped his understanding of power, of life, and of what it truly meant to care. The first rays of dawn crept through the tall windows of the Whitmore estate, casting long, golden beams across the polished floors. The mansion, usually so silent in the early morning, felt alive with a new energy, tentative, fragile, but undeniably present. Jonathan Whitmore sat in the study, staring blankly at the walls, the events of the night replaying in his mind like a relentless film. The relief of Henry's stabilization had not yet fully settled. Beneath it lay a quiet fear. They had won the battle for the moment, but the war against time and illness was far from over. Maria, meanwhile, moved quietly through the halls, performing her duties with the same calm precision as always, yet there was a subtle shift in the way she was perceived. The staff no longer glanced at her, as if she were invisible. Nurses who had doubted her judgment now paused respectfully as she passed. Even Jonathan's assistant, who prided herself on knowing every corner of the household hierarchy, could not help but look at Maria with something approaching reverence. But the outside world loomed, relentless and unyielding. Calls from doctors, reminders of appointments, and the subtle pressure of Jonathan's business empire intruded on the fragile sanctuary of the nursery. Jonathan, a man accustomed to commanding boardrooms and negotiating multi-million-dollar deals, found himself unmoored in a place where influence meant nothing. The world outside demanded answers, strategies, results, and Henry's life could not be measured in spreadsheets or timelines. Maria noticed his growing anxiety. She approached quietly, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "We'll face the world together," she said softly. "But right now, we stay with him. That's what matters." Jonathan nodded, gratitude and admiration mingling with exhaustion. He realized that the world beyond the mansion could wait. The priority was here, in this room, with his son. And yet, he could not ignore the subtle truth that Maria's actions had shifted something fundamental. She had not only saved Henry's life, she had also unsettled the carefully maintained order of their world. The invisible maid had become the pivotal force in a family used to dictating every outcome. As the morning unfolded, small challenges emerged. Doctors wanted updates, nurses requested guidance, and Jonathan's mind raced with decisions he had never imagined he would make. But each time he glanced toward Henry or saw Maria quietly ensuring his comfort, he was reminded that courage and presence mattered more than any protocol, more than any power or wealth. The realization settled in his chest like a stone. The mansion, the fortune, the empire. All of it paled in comparison to the life of his son and to the quiet, unstoppable force of a woman who had refused to let despair win. And while the outside world pressed in, its judgments and expectations looming, Jonathan understood that the true challenge was not just keeping Henry alive, but navigating the shift in his own perception of what mattered most, and who truly held power when it came to life and love. By late afternoon, the mansion was quiet once more, though the weight of the night lingered like a shadow across the grand halls. Henry slept peacefully, a small smile tugging at his lips, as though he sensed the victory his fragile body had just won. Jonathan Whitmore sat beside the bed, holding his son's tiny hand, feeling a gratitude so profound it almost rendered him speechless. The empire, the power, the wealth he had spent a lifetime cultivating. All of it now seemed secondary, insignificant compared to the miracle he had witnessed. Maria remained at Henry's side, her presence steady, calm, and unwavering. She had done the impossible, yet she did not claim glory. She simply sat there, allowing Jonathan the space to recognize what he already knew. Without her courage, without her quiet insistence on refusing to give up, Henry would not have made it through the night. When Jonathan finally spoke, his voice was low but full of emotion. "Maria, I don't know how to thank you. You saved my son. You saved all of us from losing him." She shook her head gently, her eyes soft but firm. "I didn't save him alone. He wanted to fight. I just helped him find the strength to do it. That's all any of us can do. Be there when it matters most." The truth of her words struck Jonathan deeply. For all his life, he had measured value by what could be earned, controlled, or acquired. But this act of courage, compassion, and unwavering commitment taught him something money could never buy: the immeasurable power of presence, of empathy, and of relentless hope. As the evening sun poured gold across the nursery, Jonathan realized that the hierarchy of their world had subtly, irrevocably shifted. Maria, the maid who had once gone unnoticed, was now the unspoken heart of the household. She had acted when no one else could, risking authority, expectation, and even judgment to ensure life triumphed over despair. Her bravery would echo in their lives for years to come. Henry stirred awake, blinking at the warm light and the familiar faces around him. Jonathan's eyes filled with tears as he whispered, "You're safe now, little one. Safe because of her." He looked at Maria, gratitude, awe, and respect shining in his gaze. She nodded, smiling softly, knowing that the bond forged in the crucible of that night would never be broken. In the days that followed, life returned to a quieter rhythm, but nothing would ever be the same. Jonathan carried a newfound humility, a recognition that wealth and power were fleeting, but acts of courage and love endured. And Maria, once invisible, now held a place in the family's heart that no title, no fortune could ever challenge. The night of terror had passed, and what remained was hope, fragile, enduring, and alive. It was proof that even in the darkest hours, one person's courage could shift destiny, one quiet act could defy the impossible, and one heart could change the course of another life forever. Henry's laughter eventually filled the halls again, a sound sweeter than any chime, richer than any treasure. And Jonathan Whitmore, the billionaire who had once believed he controlled everything, finally understood the truth. The greatest wealth in life is not money, not influence, not power. It is love, courage, and the selfless acts of those who refuse to surrender when it matters most.